Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the classroom. Today's agenda, we will do a read aloud together. We will also do a reading lesson together. And then you will be completing independent reading on your own. The materials that you need for today's lesson will be a piece of paper folded in half, a pen or a pencil, and you might even want a brother or a sister, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, somebody to talk to during our read aloud when we have turn and talks. Let's get started. Before we get into our story for today, let's recap what we read yesterday. If you remember, last time we were here, we read a story called A Cinderella Named Zoe. And this was the first of two stories in If the Shoe Fits, two Cinderella stories. And A Cinderella Named Zoe was about a girl named Zoe who had a stepbrother who played tricks on her often. She had to stay home to do her brother's chores instead of going to a party that she really wanted to go to. Her fairy godmother, Miss Fortuna, showed up to help Zoe magically finish her chores so she could go. On the way, she lost one of her golden tennis shoes, but luckily she was accepted at the party when everybody took off one shoe too. Through this conflict, Zoe learned that you don't have to have everything to make your dreams come true. Today, we will read the second story of our fairy tale collection. This one is called A Cinderella Named Kwan, a Korean story. I'm hoping that you'll notice some similarities and some differences between the story that we read today and the one that we read with Zoe. You're going to have the same thinking job as you did the last time to help us compare and contrast. Today, I want you to continue to think about the conflicts and the resolutions that our main character Kwan experiences throughout this fairy tale. Before we start reading, there are going to be some vocabulary words for us to pay attention to. The first word that we're going to pay attention to is pleasure. Pleasure is a feeling of happiness or satisfaction, enjoyment. The next word is jealous. Jealous is a feeling or showing envy of someone or their achievements and advantages. Sometimes people will say that they are green with jealousy or green with envy. And that is why our face is green in this picture, because typically green is associated with jealous. The last word is hobbled, which means to walk in an awkward way, typically because of pain or an injury. So we might hobble after we trip and fall, or we hurt our knee, or we break an ankle. We'll hobble from side to side as we try to walk. It can be funny sometimes. So let's go ahead and get started. A Cinderella Named Kwan, a Korean story. Long, long ago, a baby girl was born. Her father named her Kwan, which means strong. Sadly, her mother died. Years later, Kwan's father remarried. His new wife and her own daughter named He, which means pleasure. Kwan's stepmother and stepsister were jealous of Kwan and unkind to her. What details in the story help us understand how Kwan's stepmother and stepsister feel about her? Did you notice that it says that they were unkind to her and that they were jealous of her? Those details help us understand that they probably don't like Quan very much. Let's keep reading. One beautiful spring morning, Quan's stepmother said, "I'm taking he to the festival." "Can I go, honorable mother?" asked Quan. "Yes, but first you must weed the garden." He and her mother laughed as they left for the city. Quan's heart was heavy. The garden was filled with weeds. She went outside and was surprised by a large brown cow who said, "I'll eat the weeds." "Yes, please," Quan said. The cow chopped all the weeds in a flash. What characteristics of a fairy tale have you noticed so far? Oh, did you notice that Quan has a conflict? Remember yesterday we said fairy tales have conflicts. And did you notice that the cow was talking to Quan? That shows us some magic because cows do not talk in real life. Suddenly, a flock of songbirds appeared in the sky, carrying a lovely robe and slippers. "For the strong one," they sang. Thrilled, Quan dashed down the road to the bridge crossing the river. She tripped and fell. One of her slippers splashed into the water. "Oh no!" cried Quan, watching the slipper float away. Quan hobbled home and hid the gown and slipper in an old trunk. I noticed another characteristic of a fairy tale. The songbirds are carrying a robe and slippers to Quan. I know this is a magical moment in the story because those objects would be too heavy in real life. Meanwhile, a young prince was traveling to the festival. Thirsty, he stopped by the river for a drink. He put his lips to the cold, rushing water, and a beautiful slipper floated by. "Pretty slipper? Pretty lady?" he asked as he grabbed the slipper. "Pretty lady," sang the birds flying above. "I must find her," he declares. I am seeing more and more evidence that this is a fairy tale. I see a prince and songbirds singing Pretty Lady. Most fairy tales I know have prince and princesses. Why do you think the songbirds were helping the prince return the slipper to Quan? I was thinking that the birds were like a fairy godmother here, trying to bring the prince to true love. That's how most fairy tales go anyway, don't you think? Let's keep reading. The prince traveled to many farms, asking every young woman to try on the slipper. Arriving at Kwan's farm, he showed it to He and Kwan. He shoved Kwan to the side, saying, "It's mine." "You were not polite," said the prince. "Your sister will try first." Kwan slipped her foot into the slipper. "You are strong and beautiful," he said. "Please marry me." Smiling, Kwan said, "Yes." The songbirds swirled above. Happy was their song. Wow. Despite all the challenges Kwan experienced, how would you describe how she's feeling right now? If you said happy, I think you are on the right track. This is the moment where we could say happily ever after, like our traditional fairy tales do. Kwan is most definitely feeling happy because the prince found her and she found her slipper. So we've read two fairy tales and If the Shoe Fits, with our major characters Zoe and Kwan. Think about how their experiences compare to the traditional Cinderella fairy tale. What similarities and differences you notice in these fairy tales? I'm going to give you 1 minute to think about your answer. About halfway there. So we know that Cinderella lost her glass slipper and the prince found it and found her by having all the ladies try on the slipper, just like the prince did in Kwan's story. And we know that before she went to the ball, the fairy godmother helped her finish her chores and dressed her all up to go to the ball, just like Miss Fortuna did. So that's kind of how these stories are very similar to our traditional fairy tale Cinderella. The differences would be uh, Kwan is a Korean fairy tale, and we know Cinderella was not Korean. We also know that Cinderella did not have friends. She had creatures and animals that helped her clean the house, whereas Zoe had lots of friends. So we could think of more and more. I'm sure you came up with even more than I did. So let's move into our reading lesson. Today we will compare the similarities and the differences between the characters in our fairy tales. We're going to be looking at Zoe and Kwan. When we're comparing characters, it's important to first think of two characters. Then think of how you will compare the characters. Do you want to look at their traits, how they handle challenges, their likes, dislikes, their interests, how they change throughout the story? Or you might compare the lessons they learn. In order to do this, no matter what trait we choose or how we choose to compare them, we have to ask ourselves a few questions. First, we have to ask ourselves, what problem does the character encounter? We could also ask, what's similar and different about the two characters? Compare each character at the beginning when they experience a conflict and how they respond. Determine what is most important when comparing these two characters. And what that means is we don't want to just compare their hair color or their clothes. We really want to dive deep into these characters and reach the most important things about them. So we're going to do this by using a term, and we're going to choose a category, and we're going to compare Zoe and Quan. The first category that I'll do for us is going to be the problem. And when I think about the problem that Zoe had, I think about her issue that she was having with her brother. Well, her stepbrother. And so this is what I came up with. Her stepbrother got her into trouble and she couldn't go to the party. That was her issue. And when I think about Quan really wanted to go to the festival, but her stepmother and her stepsister made her do chores. So I wrote, her stepmother and stepsister were unkind to her and made her do the weeding alone. So you see how we took one category and compared the characters using this category. We're going to do another. This time we're going to do it together. And we're going to add to our chart. The next category is going to be family. Now, I want you to think about Zoe's family and Quan's family. Write down what you think Zoe's family was like. Then I want you to write down what Quan's family was like. Your paper is folded in half, so you can do Zoe on one side and Quan on the other. I'm going to give you 1 minute to write one sentence about Zoe's family and one sentence about Quan's family. About 30 more seconds. Ten more seconds. Okay, I'm going to show you what I wrote, and I want you to compare it to what you wrote. Zoe's family was her mother and her stepbrother. Quan's family was her dad, her stepmother, stepsister. Did you get it? Let's try another category. time, we're going to look at the magic that we saw in Zoe's story and the magic that we saw in Quan's story. You're going to get 1 minute to write down a sentence that tells about the magic in Zoe's story and the magic in Quan's story. Are you ready? Your 1 minute starts now. About halfway there. Ten more seconds. Are you ready? Okay. Take a look at my paper. Is it what you wrote down? Miss Fortuna was the magic in Zoe's story. You might have even written down the magic shears that cut the grass. And the songbirds and the talking cow were the magic in Quan's story. Did you get it? We have one more row to fill out. This time, we're going to look at the good versus evil. Most of the time in fairy tales, we'll see the good character and the bad character, or evil or villain. I want you to think about the good and the evil in Zoe's story. And think about the good and the evil in Quan's story. When you have the answer that you think is correct, write down blank versus blank and fill it in with what you think was the good versus evil in each story. About 10 more seconds. Let's compare our answers. Zoe versus her stepbrother. He was the one that was always playing tricks on her. It was his fault that she almost didn't make it to the party. He was the evil in that story. Let's look at Quan's. Quan versus stepmother and stepsister. Those were the two who weren't kind to her. Those were the two who made her weed all by herself so she couldn't go to the festival. How did you do? Okay, boys and girls, before we go into our independent reading time, we have to do an exit ticket. Today, our exit ticket is coming from the Cinderella Quan. Based on the story, the reader can infer Quan feels. Think about how Quan was feeling throughout our story at different moments. Quan feels loved by her stepmother and stepsister, that true love is real, hopeful that her stepmother and stepsister will accept her, strong and beautiful. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to write down your answer on your notebook paper. Are you ready? I'll give you 5 more seconds. Okay, cover your answer. Are you ready to see the answer? D. Quan feels strong and beautiful. We know at the beginning of the story, Quan's name means strong. And at the end of the story, the prince reassured her that she was strong and beautiful. So that was our text evidence to support our answer. Did you get it right? Of course you did. I know you guys did. So today we learned how to compare similarities and differences of characters in our fairy tales. Today, as you start reading independently, you're going to ask yourself the same questions that we asked ourselves today during our lesson. Ask yourself, what problem does the main character encounter in my fairy tale? What's similar and different about these two characters? I want you to compare each character at the beginning of the story, when they experience the conflict, and then compare them how they respond to the conflict. All of these things are going to help you determine what's most important so that you can compare these two characters using the categories or any categories that you choose, just like we did during our lesson today. Before you get started choosing two fairy tales to read so you can compare and contrast two characters, it's important for us to choose a just right book. You've probably seen this anchor chart in your classroom, but we're going to review it to make sure everybody understands. When you choose your book, you're going to open up to any page, and you're going to put a finger up for every word that you are not sure of. If you have 0 fingers that go up, that means that book is probably too easy, and you should choose one that's more difficult. If you put 1 to 2 fingers up, then that book is perfect, and you definitely are set to read that book. 3 to 4 fingers up means that book might be too hard, but you should definitely give it a try. If you put 5 fingers up, that means that your book is too hard and you should put it down and choose a different one. When you're choosing your just right book today so that you can practice your comparing and contrasting two main characters, we're going to be focused on fairy tales. And when you look for these fairy tales, make sure that they have characters conflict and resolution, and magic. Some books that would not work for today's lesson would be realistic fiction and nonfiction or magazines. To help you get started, I wrote down a list of some of the fairy tales that I knew of. Goldilocks and the Three Bears, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Sleeping Beauty, Rapunzel, and The Little Mermaid. I'm going to give you about 1 minute to write down these titles so that you can use them later when it's your turn to read your independent book. All right, choose your favorite fairy tale and get started. We'll see you next time.